a portfolio for sustainability. So you've heard lots about digitalization or sustainability at this session. We're going to focus in on a couple of key industries that we believe are important for the transition, and that is the energy and the chemicals companies. So first of all, if we could just ask, please just silence your devices. Feel free to take any photographs or anything that you might need. Be sure to give feedback on the session at the end of it. That's really important. And most importantly, we want to engage with you during this session. So we are going to have a few presentations and we'll have questions at the end. So a little bit of context for this session. So ultimately, we see the energy transition and a move towards circular economy is causing investors, energy and chemical companies to realign priorities and projects to meet new sustainability perspectives. So we see project teams embracing digital transformation as part of that sustainability journey, and it's usually underpinned by some type of a rigorous sustainability framework other than just cost metrics. Right, so this criteria is guiding innovation, design, and sustainability, investment, and new operational philosophies. So what we see is there's a couple of different themes here. The energy or the oil and gas companies are becoming energy companies, focusing on energy and transition and decarbonization, and the chemical industries are focusing on creating more sustainable products. Each of these companies have got some somewhat unique themes, where it's providing, if you're an energy and oil and gas company, your focus is on providing affordable, clean energy for the world. And now, as part of your sustainability initiative, you'll focus on improving land and water management and creating a lower carbon business, or reducing energy emissions in facilities. If you're a chemical company, you're going to focus more on those products that are more tangible to the customer and impacting the plastics industry and producing less plastic waste in the environment, or reducing freshwater intake, or recycling materials in the process. So it's a combination of factors that's driving this industry. One, it's consumer pressure. Consumers are asking for products that are more sustainable in nature, either last long, more recycled content, and consumers are looking for products that have got a lower carbon intensity and footprint associated with it. We're seeing government regulation is impacting this change, everything from mandating no more single-use plastics, or implementing new fuel standards, or introducing carbon taxes in many states or in countries. And even more importantly, what we're seeing from the investor community, companies like Vanguard and BlackRock, who have got major stakes in a lot of energy companies today, are starting to demand that energy companies have got proven sustainability investments and strategies at the center of their portfolio. I just want to, before we get going into the presentations, I'm just going to share a little bit about some of the research that we're doing. ARC does have a sustainability program. This particular part of our research, this was conducted back in 2020, where we benchmarked about 349 industrial companies on understanding programs and drivers for sustainability. And there's a couple of things we found is 77% of manufacturers believe that digitalization is very high or of extreme importance in obtaining or achieving sustainability goals. So that's really important. So this conference is certainly focused on digital. And a couple of things not surprising, the other drivers for their sustainability programs are 45% believe that increase access to capital and satisfy customer buying preferences, and also gain a competitive advantage. So these are all really important drivers, and we're here today to learn a little bit more about some of these some great companies.
I'm Jen Jusen. I work for LyondellBasell. What I thought I'd do this morning is just walk through a little bit of our sustainability report, which was our 2030 future focus, and highlight some of the areas that are really meaningful to us. Before we get started, though, we have to have our cautionary statement from our legal guys. It says basically, whatever I say is forward-looking and doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to impact the finances of the company. So, okay. So who is LyondellBasell? A lot of people actually don't know who we are. We're actually a very large plastics and petrochemical company. We make olefins and polyolefins, so polyethylene and polypropylene. We also recently moved into the compounding area. Compounding is important because it allows us the ability to make lightweight materials, for example, for automotive, so for electric vehicles. It actually gets us one step closer to the customer. We operate in 21 different countries today for manufacturing. We sell in over 100 countries, and we have about 19,000 employees that work for us today. So when we think about sustainability, I always think about innovation, and if you think about how LyondellBasell was formed, we're actually a company of innovation. All the way back to the 1950s when we think about Ziegler-Natta catalysts for polyethylene and polypropylene. As we move through time and we make propylene oxide through a co-product technology, and propylene oxide is used actually to make polyurethanes, so foams, for shoes, for sofas. I mean, it's got a broad application base. Going forward even more, we think about catalyst development for making better polyethylene or polypropylene catalysts out in the market. And then we get to the end where we start talking about circularity. So we've invested with Suez. We have a joint venture with them in the EU where we are looking at mechanically recycled polymers. We also are looking at catalyst development for chemically or advanced recycling, what we say, taking those hard to recycle plastics and making them back into a pyrolysis oil. So our company, I can say honestly, has kind of come full circle when it comes through innovation and development. So our approach to sustainability, what I'm going to highlight on the next couple of slides are really three key focus areas: plastic waste, climate change, and a thriving society. And underneath you'll see there's 5 different buckets that we focus on, and it is actually truly embedded in our company today. We have a sustainability lead, but we have sustainability people within the business, within manufacturing, within procurement. I mean, we've really embraced and are moving forward in this direction. So let's talk a little bit about plastic waste. Plastic is a great material. It just needs to be utilized in the right applications in the right ways and recycled. So we've been very public in some of the things we've talked about doing. We want to have at least 2 million metric tons of plastic reused in some way, whether it's mechanically or chemically recycled and sold back into the marketplace. We're driving to close that loop for us and create products that customers will want to buy so that they can also create more sustainable products. A lot of what we do also starts at home. So when we look at our manufacturing sites, 0 pellet loss. We've actually done a lot within our sites to make sure that we're collecting everything that we have and we're not having anything go into gutters or any other locations. So a lot of it is embedded in our manufacturing processes. And then we also are working with others. So we talk a lot about that, I think, earlier today and yesterday, that really to make a substantial change, you cannot do it by yourself. You really have to partner with others or collaborate with others so that we can make more monumental changes. And so I want to go to the next slide and just talk a little bit about the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Our CEO that just retired, Bob Patel, took a very bold move several years ago and said, you know what, plastics are a problem. And that's really a big move for somebody who is the CEO of a plastics company. He said, look, plastics are a great material, but we are not doing what we need to do to recycle and reuse. So he co-chaired the Alliance to End Plastic Waste with Jim Fitterling of Dow, and they've created now this network, Procter & Gamble. There's a number of companies that are involved in it today that really are looking to find solutions for a better tomorrow. So as a collective, we do want to make sure that packaging material, for example, is reused in some way, whether it's chemically recycled or mechanically recycled or reused on its own. We want to find those solutions that make sense. So that's an area where we work very closely together with others. Operation Clean Sweep is also what I was talking about earlier about 0 pellet loss. The manufacturing facilities, the onus is on us to start at home and make sure we're doing the right things. So when I talked about the 2 million metric tons by 2030, we actually started a brand called Circulin. So we have Circulin, Recover, Renew, and Revive. So it helps us to designate how we're recycling material and then how we can communicate that to the customer. So like I was saying earlier, we have a mechanically recycled company in Europe today called QCP. It's a JV with Suez. We're looking to expand that opportunity and do more there, obviously. And so doing something in the US would also be very important to us. So we are taking polymers and we're recycling it and putting it back in materials. The thing that I really like about this picture is one of our big things we did was we collaborated with Samsonite and we made a white suitcase. And so one would ask, why on earth would you want a white suitcase when you go to the airport? The importance of the white suitcase, though, was the fact that when you mechanically recycle polymer, it is very hard to make it a bright white. So we wanted to be able to show that we could make a product that could be reused in any application. So yes, you could have been one of those folks that got the white suitcase when we first rolled it out. Now, I don't know if you still want to use the white suitcase, but it was available. So, and then we have our advanced recycling, where we are doing chemical recycled plastic, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And then finally, we talk about Circulin Renew. And I want to highlight this because just for the fact we are using bio-based products, and I do think that's important. I think it is a way for us to create an environment of circularity and get off the ground and running while these others are still building. It's going to take time to have enough mechanically and chemically recycled plastic. It just takes time and infrastructure. So talking about advanced recycling or more technology, so what we have today is a collaboration with the Karlsruhe Institute. And so we have a catalyst today, and we are recycling some of the things that are very difficult to recycle, so certain plastic films. And so we have a pilot scale unit already, and we are up to the point to now want to build and commercialize the process. Switching over to climate change, and I'm going to just switch to the next slide for a second. We think about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So publicly we have said for our 2030 goal, we want to reduce our CO2 or greenhouse gas footprint by 30%. And that is something that's manageable and it's doable, Scope 1 and Scope 2. Part of it is transitioning to renewable energy. So we have had a program in place. My team is running today on solar and wind. So it's either through virtual power purchase agreements or putting on-site solar, but it's something that we have been really driving over the last couple of years. So at least we would like to publicly state that we at least wanted 50% of our electricity covered by renewables by 2030. Candidly, we're working faster than that because I think it's important. The next goal, really, which is what I would consider the bold goal, is net zero by 2050. And that's our Scope 1 and Scope 2 footprint. And it is a bold goal. And I think we talked about it this morning when Mike was talking. You have to have a bold goal or you're not going to make it there. You really have to reach for the stars. And that is something that we are really working hard to do today. And do we know exactly how we're going to get there? No. But we do know a few things. We're going to partner with others. We're going to work with digital. And I wanted to highlight this. The discussion on digital I thought was incredibly important. This is a huge data lift, and I don't think people really appreciate how big that data lift truly is. We're looking at site by site, trying to figure out how our assets run. We're trying to figure out how to be more efficient and effective. We're also looking at how projects lay on top of each other, so we are getting the best advancement possible within these programs. So, we've already, as we go through some of our sites, we look at the easy things first, right? Getting rid of coal. How do we get steam in a more circular way? So part of it could be a stopgap moving to natural gas. Part of it is substituting, low pressure steam for high pressure steam. All of these things are data driven for us, which is why I think digital becomes something so key for us. We look at every site. We have a program at every site, and we're running two programs in parallel, right? We look at our 2030 goals and our 2050 goals together. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to make a decision for 2030 that could have impacted what we wanted to do for 2050. Okay. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about supporting a thriving society. Everything we do today doesn't happen unless we have good people working with us. So we think about internal and external. So when we think about the internal piece of it, we want to talk first about safety. So if you ask anybody at LyondellBasell at what our safety culture is, and they will tell you it's goal zero. We want everybody to go home at the end of the day, every night, safely. And it's in everything we do at the sites. And so, we look and learn about high potential incidents that could have been an accident. We review when an accident or an incident does happen, how we do things better, but the goal is always to improve our situation. The other thing we did in the last 2 years is implement a DEI strategy. So within DEI, we really wanted everyone to be able to bring their whole selves to work, not just to come to work, but be able to vocalize their thoughts and opinions. When I think about sustainability, we talked earlier about the fact that it really is about innovation. Innovation is key. You cannot innovate with a mindset that is only one way. You have to bring people in with a diversity of thought that allows folks to brainstorm how we get to where we want to be. We are not going to get to 2050 doing the same things we do every day. So having someone come in and bring their ideas and their thought process about how we make change, I think is incredibly important. So I'm very thrilled about the DEI strategy because I am a chemist. I don't like to hire chemists. I like to hire other people other than chemists because I don't want you to think like me. I want you to think differentially and tell me your ideas because I do think that's incredibly important. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about is sustainable procurement. So within sustainable procurement, so we've talked a lot about scope 1 and scope 2, right? Scope 1 is in the site. Scope 2 is our electricity and steam or third-party provider. Scope 3 is really all the raw materials we bring into the site today. Huge data lift for us. We probably have 27,000 SKUs of things we bring in today. So again, can't go it alone, right? So we're working with EcoVadis and Together for Sustainability to first and foremost understand how do we do better, right? So we talk about our sustainability program and where they thought we had gaps, and then working with our suppliers. Working with our suppliers, I think, really helps us to align on how to report, and that is very important. Again, huge data lift. How do we report our scope 3? Their scope 1 and scope 2 becomes my scope 3. So how do we do this in a uniform manner so that we're credible and that we're solving the right problems? We also want to make sure people are following the same sustainability pathway that we want to. So, and maybe anecdotally, I'll tell you, EcoVadis said, well, Jen, what you can do eventually is if somebody's not as sustainable as you would like them to be, you just cut them out of your portfolio. So I'm just going to tell you, supply chain being what it is today, I want everybody to come along for the ride on sustainability because I do want to keep all of my suppliers. And so that's the idea for us, is this collaborative environment where we work with others and we bring our suppliers along for the ride with us and hope that they are going to want to be as sustainable as we are. EcoVadis partners with Together for Sustainability, and the things that they do is they help us audit some of the suppliers, and they also really help us give out, like, how do we get better together programs? These things are not that complicated, but if somebody can give you some guidelines, not telling you what to do, but some guidelines to help you get to a better place, and you can do it in a more rapid fashion, I think that's incredibly helpful. All right, so I want to say thank you. This is all of us from our Global Care Day. And, I think hopefully today I gave you a little bit of a flavor of what we're doing at LyondellBasell. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here today. First real opportunity. So you may get a lot of information from us. We haven't talked a lot about our portfolio of projects and how we're developing our projects. So this is kind of my first opportunity after 2.5 years down in the trenches, working hard to develop these projects and to roll them out and talk about them. So I'll try to be brief if I can, but you'll have to understand we have a lot of passion about what we're doing and what we're doing for the environment. So Peter asked me to talk about several things today, but first I wanted to introduce Fidelis and who we are to the folks, because you probably don't know who Fidelis New Energy is. So I start with kind of the mom and apple pie sort of things. What business are we in? And we're in the carbon reduction business. We are seeking to develop, build, own, and operate carbon negative infrastructure and create climate positive impacts. And that's who we are. I love the fact that Jen brought safety up. I'm classically trained as an engineer. I've spent 30 years building, operating, and maintaining assets, have a tremendous passion and focus on safety, both process safety and industrial safety. So it's hard to ever see a meeting start without talking about safety, so thanks for bringing that up, Jen. But we're kind of a different animal. Our team comes from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different places. Our core team actually cut their teeth in infrastructure investment, making significant investments in infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit about some of those investments here shortly. But we're also a mix of engineers and project managers and chemists and process engineers and electrical engineers that come together with the finance folks to develop projects that make a difference. So we see ourselves as a pure play decarbonization infrastructure business. When you think about the life cycle we've been through, for the first, up until 2010, the focus was on efficient production from the fossil resources that were available to us. And that's what delivered the quality of life and the great economic expansion that most of us have experienced over the last 50 years. Then beginning in the early 2000s into 2010, you saw the emergence of the offset-focused companies that were then looking to expand in things like wind and solar and looking to change the way their portfolio looked from an impact potential. We see ourselves working in the next era of this enterprise and as a pure play, carbon negative, climate positive business. We don't have a bias in existing legacy assets. A lot of folks do. That's not a bad thing. And some folks are doing some great things to maximize the transition of those legacy assets. That's just not what we focus on. We focus on greenfield assets. We don't carry forward any legacy bias. We focus only on opportunities to create truly carbon negative products, whether it's transportation fuels or intermediate products. That's our focus. So in order to develop a portfolio for sustainability, you have to start with being able to develop a portfolio. And that may sound like an easy lift, but it's not. Our experience over the last 10 years has been deeply rooted in developing portfolios across multiple industries, everything from midstream product transportation and distribution to electrical transportation, transmission and distribution, even the first project financed Butane 1 facility ever developed in the United States. So we're infrastructure investors at heart. That means all of our projects are focused on proven technologies. We don't take any technology risk. Developing a project is hard enough. Developing technology is hard enough. Trying to develop technologies and projects at the same time is nearly impossible. So we focus on proven technologies at or near the scale that we want to build. We focus on scale. We're not building teapots. We're building real refineries, real projects, large scale. The growing gigasystem that I'll speak about shortly, that's why we call them gigasystems. These are gigaton CO2 engines. These are engines that can reduce CO2 emissions in the giga scale to the tune of 4 million tons per year of CO2 eliminated from the atmosphere through our first grown ecosystem. So we focus on scale, we do things large, but we also do them in a fairly infrastructure conservative mindset, which means we like to have contracted offtakes for our products. We tend to work with EPC partners that can provide us price and performance certainty and technology partners that are well proven in the industry that they work in. So the way we changed our view and what we deployed to allow us to develop these projects this way is our proprietary RACER framework. And RACER is kind of our internal operating system for developing projects. And it's an acronym. We all love acronyms. So it starts with R, which is rational. And from our perspective, that means economically rational, not in the traditional context of economically rational. It's not just about overnight capital cost or project efficiency, but rational through the lens of carbon intensity and the value of carbon intensity reduction and how the value of that carbon intensity reduction plays into the values that our customers, the folks that will buy the products that our plants produce, the folks that partner with us on offtakes, how that's valuable to them. It requires a little bit of a change in mindset. It requires us to work with our engineering partners to think differently about payback period and what's contemplated in how we look at our projects. The second letter is A for all inclusive. So this is not scope 1 or scope 2 or scope 3. This is all scopes, right? So we're looking up and down the supply chain. We look at everything from the logistics of our feedstocks into our plants to the transportation of the products that are leaving our plants. I mean, our products, especially our transportation fuels, are valued typically on a low carbon fuel standard basis or a RIN basis. And those pathways are comprehensive. They are tip to tail. And so all-inclusive means thinking about all of those carbon impacts, the carbon impacts that we have inside our plant as well as our supply chain on both ends, energy consumption, water use and reuse. So lots of integration opportunities and lots of ways to think about how we can be all-inclusive in evaluating our development processes. Continuous. This is the one that's hard for us engineers, right? We really love to kind of lock in and lock down. Tell me what you want to build, boss, and let me build it. It doesn't work that way in this environment. We're constantly seeking the best outcomes that we can seek. We're constantly trying to develop assets that will survive over the long haul. Assets that have what we refer to as moats around these assets. These moats allow our assets to produce and prosper when other assets won't be able to keep up. And so that's the continuous component of this. Environmental impact reduction, the E and the R, again, comprehensive, looking at all scenarios where we impact the environment. We have an analog for this, which I'll talk about in a minute, is our RACER framework for DE&I. In our RACER framework for DE&I, we replace environmental impact reduction with equitable ramp. And our objective through our DEI framework is to create that equitable ramp for all of the communities that we work in, for all the people that work on our projects, and for all the people that use our products that come from our projects. So a lot of time on RACER, but this is kind of our DNA. And I'll talk about how that works for us and how we tie that into building a portfolio for sustainability. So what we've done over the time is, we went out and developed RACER trying to do what we thought was right. And then we look backwards at what other people think is right. And we look back at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what we found was that if you're really focused on doing the right things, it's real easy to understand and make connections to and ties to all of those Sustainable Development Goals. Each one of our projects touches every one of these Sustainable Development Goals in some way or another. When you first start looking at some of these goals, you think, okay, how can a project in Port Allen, Louisiana, that's making renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and bio-naphtha help prevent poverty? Well, it can in so many ways. In ways they're dealing with the poverty that exists right there in that own community. Also in our choices of feedstocks, by not choosing feedstocks or creating feedstock flexibility that allows us to not be dependent on feedstocks that harm food supply feedstocks. So looking at all those alternatives, having the most flexibility in feedstocks. So again, throughout all 17 of those goals, you can look for those direct ties, and we think about our RACER framework as how we achieve those sustainability goals that are identified by the United Nations. So now this is where I get passionate, is around the project factory. Again, I'm a managing director at Fidelis, but I'm also the chief projects officer. And so we execute all of our projects through a portfolio management office. And so we work very closely with our investment team members to go through this infrastructure delivery model. It starts with picking good markets, right? It's very difficult. I did a lot of wind and solar development. I love wind and solar folks. They work really hard on very thin margins. Those projects are difficult. They live and die on single-digit changes in overnight capital costs. Not sure I really want to do much of that. So we pick good markets. We want to pick markets that are attractive and that are creative and markets that want us there. Next, we think about project scoping and what projects do we want to build that tackle those markets? How do we want to be in those markets? Where do we want to play in those markets? The next thing we go through is our development cycle. We also work through our financing processes. Again, we are an infrastructure investor at heart. We tend to own and operate our own assets, but all of our projects are non-recourse project finance, which means our projects have to stand on their own and pass muster with our debt providers as well as our equity players. And then how do we deliver those projects? What is our process for making sure we work those projects through development, into delivery, and ultimately into operations, where we can then continue to optimize those assets over time? So I think everybody's seen the traditional influence curve, and most folks will tell you that the way to attack the influence curve is to spend a lot of money up front and do a lot of engineering. At least when I was selling engineering services, that's what I told a lot of people. What we found is, yeah, there's some value in doing a lot of front-end engineering. There's also a lot of value in tackling a lot of the other binary risk associated with project development. So that's what we tend to do. Development dollars are extremely precious. The time and energy we spend in developing these projects up front before we get to FID needs to be on the right stuff. We need to focus on the right things. The right things for us are things like selecting a great market, picking a good technology, a technology that is a market leader, a technology that has a balance sheet behind it. Right? So we spend our time working on those things, making sure that we have line of sight to our permits, spending time and energy on doing enough design on our emissions profiles, doing enough design to make sure that we can get our projects permitted. I dare to say we probably have the only 70,000 barrel a day refinery in the United States that's permitted under a minor source air permit. That took a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of capital, but we've done that. So that's one of the binary risks we try to move. And then the balance of those permitting issues, we also need to know how much the project's going to cost. We absolutely have to get certainty around cost and performance of our projects before we reach our final investment decision. So we spend time stair-stepping the risk of these projects down on the front end, doing enough design, enough work to make sure that we've taken all of the binary risks out and that we have a successful project going forward. So that's how we tackle the influence curve. This is the organization that I look after. I'm fortunate enough to have some really great team members on this organization. But this is how we're organized to deliver our projects. We have an engineering function, which handles development engineering, design engineering, classic engineering functions. We have our project delivery function, which delivers the projects. But we also support the asset performance management function out of our portfolio management office. So our job and our goal, which is kind of the mission on the next slide, is we're really responsible for taking that investment thesis and working it through the development cycle, all the way through project delivery, and then on into asset performance. Again, we've been at this for about 2.5 years as Fidelis New Energy. We're actually approaching final investment decision on our first gigasystem, the growing gigasystem, which I'll talk about shortly. And so we're working our way through those processes. And again, I'm kind of an asset management geek. I spent a lot of my career, it's where I got to know the folks here at ARC Advisory Group. We like to think about our delivery model in the context of the asset anatomy, and how we deliver projects is kind of tied into that. I could spend hours on how we're developing our operating system with respect to this. I won't bore you with that. I'll move on. But it's a big part of how we're navigating from project development through project delivery and on into asset operations and maintenance, and how we're going to complete that cycle and keep going, preserve knowledge, build great organizations, have a focus on safety, keep D&I at the forefront, and make sure we do it all in a digital way. So our 4 sectors and gigasystems, I'll try to fly through some of this. I don't want to take the whole session up. But for us, what is a gigasystem? So I'll talk about the Grown Fuels gigasystem as kind of the starting point. Grown Fuels gigasystem is our gigasystem in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's the one that will reach final investment decision in the 3rd quarter of this year. It's a roughly nameplate 60,000 barrel a day renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and bio-naphtha plant. It uses fats, oils, and greases as feedstocks, plant-based and animal-based. It has its own green hydrogen plant, so we're tightly integrated there and produce a truly low carbon solution for transportation fuels. When we couple that grown fuel system with our Capio sequestration portfolio company, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit, That allows us to go to the next step and get into the low single digits in carbon intensity. By capturing the CO2 primarily from our hydrogen, our SMR, capturing that CO2, compressing it, cleaning it, sending it in a pipeline, and permanently sequestering it in our sequestration areas that we've cooperated with the state of Louisiana on, that allows us to get to low single digits carbon intensity. The next leg down is by implementing our biomass carbon negative power plant with carbon capture and storage. At this point, the transportation fuels produced by the growing facility will be carbon negative. We have clear pathways identified that have been supported. We'll be basically supplying carbon negative transportation fuels in 2025, early 2026 from the grown fuels facility, once Cyclist and Capio are on board. So that's how a gigasystem works. And so that's our definition, and this is the grown fuels gigasystem. So we have other opportunities in other manufacturing sectors. Over on the left side of the screen, you see the grown. You'll also see reference to Hytera, which is our clean hydrogen, hydrogen derivatives gigasystem. And you kind of see how the Cyclist and the Capio systems play into that. So having the pore space, having the proven capacity to sequester CO2 in deep saline aquifers in Louisiana adjacent to these facilities is a key cog. The great news is that the Grown Fuels Project and Cyclist produces about 4 million tons of CO2 that's capturable from our projects alone. That pretty much serves as the underwriting case for our Capio investment. So we'll make our Capio investment, and then ultimately that pore space may also be used by other third parties who are looking to decarbonize their operations as well. And then we're a big believer in all forms of energy that can be direct tied to our plants that offer carbon negative or at least carbon neutral power. There's just not a lot of places to put windmills inside of refineries. There's not a lot of places to put solar panels inside refineries. And believe it or not, the payback is huge. We are putting about 4.5 megawatts, maybe, it depends on what we do, somewhere between 2 and 4 megawatts of solar inside the facility in the right spaces, but it's a no-brainer. It's a slam dunk for us. Nobody else who's tied to the low carbon fuel standards are even thinking about these sort of things. It goes back to RACER and making the right decisions based on RACER. So there are 4 pillars of our climate gigasystem: the renewable fuels, the carbon capture, carbon management operation, the biomass power with carbon capture, and ultimately our Hytera, which is our blue hydrogen, hydrogen derivatives business. One of the things that Peter suggested we talk about, which is really important, you heard it from the panel this morning, is partnering. Look, we've got 40 people with a lot of experience on our team, but we're just 40 people. At different points in time, we've had probably close to 600 people working on the development of Grown, and it's been by cooperating with partners, really great partners. We can't do this by ourselves. We don't have all the answers. And so we look for really outstanding partners, our technology partners. We've chosen Topso for our Hydroflex and our hydrogen bridge technologies. We've chosen Alfa Laval for our pre-treatment units. We've chosen ABB and Yokogawa for energy management and our digital control systems. We're working closely with Koch at multiple levels. Koch Solutions and Koch OPD will be our EPC contractor. We also worked early on with Worley and Advisian as our engineering partner. And then it goes on and on through our transportation partners. Sitting down and talking about how we're going to get feedstocks into our plant in the most carbon impact resistant way we can, right? So how are we bringing these things in? Deep water vessels, rail. It's one of the great things about our Grown site. We have all those options available to us: pipeline, unit train rail, shallow water barge, deep water ship, all available to us. One of the great things about the site that we have. So partnerships are key. We can't do it by ourselves. We have great partners. We lean on our partners heavily, and they make us better. I've talked a little bit about the operating segments. I'll blow through this. Obviously, I think this materials will be available after the fact, but the Grown Fuels, Capio, Cyclist, and Hytera are 4 operating segments. Happy to speak about any of that offline if anybody's interested. The last thing I want to talk about before I leave is our digital strategy. So when we first started down this path, I guess almost we've been at it 2.5 years. I reached out to my contacts at Arc Advisory Group and said, okay, look, we've got to get back in touch and get our current thinking and current understanding of the digital aspects of the business back up to speed. We need to understand what's going on in the marketplace, what's important, who has the right solutions, what should we be thinking about. And Art did a great job, and Peter did a great job of helping us frame and understand what we need to be thinking about with respect to our digital vision and who we should be working with. Then we started thinking about our partners and who we were going to work with. So as we think about the role of digital in improving facility and performance, we actually set up a set of best practices that we thought we wanted to try to accomplish. And again, an old mentor of mine, Peter Freeman, used to tell me, you really can't know best practices until you've seen worst practices. So, we come with a lot of scar tissue, a lot of things that went well for us as individuals. We rely on our partners. We rely on peers in the industry to tell us what they're seeing and what really are the best practices. And we try to document what our expectation is about the plant. And I use this phrase a lot, right? So back when I was working in industry and I had to go through transformation projects, I thought, well, that was really hard. It's really hard to take an older organization and bend it and change it and make it something new. Have a blank slate. Try to start from scratch, right? So the good news is I don't have a legacy organization that I have to change. The bad news is I have nothing. So we have to start from scratch on every front. Policies, procedures, plans, workflows, roles, responsibilities, all of it from scratch. Again, working with great partners is the key. So we started documenting that stuff. We're 3 years away from turning on the plant. But we have to start right now thinking about how we're going to run the plant so that we can affect the design for that plant early on. We've got our partners with us right now that ultimately will be playing roles in our ERP systems, in our digital systems, in our asset performance management systems, in our control systems, so that we design these plants correctly up front so we're ready to operate them when the time comes and operate them with the lowest carbon footprint we can operate them. So again, we think about all of the different functions and that nice universe looking emblem there on the left side are all the different functions that Grown Fuels will have to have. Thinking about how we understand that organization and how that's going to connect inside our digital topology. And then the folks that have partnered with me on digital, they'll expect the next reference that's coming. That results in what I refer to as my Waffle House menu. It's all the things that we're going to do to make sure that we are successful from a digital perspective and who's in charge of each one of those functions and zones. So we have great partners, again, like ABB and Yokogawa and KBC and GE Digital, Infor, all leaning in. And what we ask them to do is bring your experience, bring your best practices, bring your best, and lean in and go with us on this journey as we develop this portfolio for sustainability. So that's my presentation for today, and look forward to the panel of questions.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Peter. Let me introduce you a little bit who is Indorama. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Indorama. Oops. I started this position around 9 months ago, and I'm going to speak a bit about sustainability today, but also how we digital support the sustainability effort of the company. So for the one who doesn't know Indorama, we are in 35 countries, around 140 plants. We are a 15 billion company today, and on every market we're operating, we're either number 1 or number 2, the main market being the PET. But also nylon fibers and are something very big for us. So we have a global presence. The global headquarters is in Bangkok, and we have around one-third by the Americas, Europe, and Asia. So we are truly global. So how we do work. So this slide is quite important. We see about the three, what we call segment, the three segment we're operating: integrated oxide and derivatives, combined PET, so all the value chain of the PET, from the aromatics to the PET to the packaging and recycling, and the fibers, the polyester fibers. And you see we have some connections and we have great synergies. I will come back to this slide a bit later, but you can see on the PET, we call that combined PET because we have all the value chain and the circular economy between the PET pellets, the packaging, the recycling, going back to the PET pellet. So I will come back on that regarding our sustainability efforts. So what are our targets? Like everybody in this industry, we're putting a big target and big bet on the table. These are just one part of our ambitions, but you can see we took some strong commitment on GHG reduction, energy intensity reduction, but also renewable energy and water intensity, water waste, and water waste treatment. So we have a 2025, 2030, and 2050 targets. I think it speaks by itself. Now, having such slides is not very complicated. The hard part is having the solutions to achieve this commitment. And you can see we already have some commitment on 2025. So we have to get at work without delay. So talking about a portfolio for sustainability, this is a great slide that stole from our sustainability team. It shows a bit the different areas we're working on all together a bit in parallel today within Indorama. We have a strong focus nowadays on the bio feedstock and bio-based feedstock. This is absolutely something critical, and we're going to have strong ambitions to have a lot of a strong ratio of our feedstocks coming from bio-based products. It's not only about the feedstock, but it's a bit long-term right here, but we're looking also at the bio-based polymers and PEF especially, but we have still a lot of research and a lot of investment in that field, so it may take a bit longer. Of course, we have a lot of decarbonization work going on, working with strong partners. We have some biofinance, and also we are looking at a project and financing linked to a green bond, blue bonds, and also some commitment on the market to finance this investment. Recycling is a very big part. I will have a quick zoom on recycling because this is really something important for us, and so forth. So how we operate once we transport that to the plant. This slide is a little bit different. You can see a lot of similar areas. However, we have one which was not on the previous slide, is operational eco-efficiency. And this is one of the areas digital, of course, we're working is really about the efficiency. We have been working on efficiency forever, digital. But now it's more about sustainability and efficiency. At the end, that may be the same. We're implementing advanced process control. We are implementing different software solutions in order to improve the efficiency, improve the yield, reduce the waste. However, looking through an angle of sustainability lead to different decisions, different priorities, different type of investment. At the end, that's the same solutions, but we are assessing the solutions with different KPIs. So that's a very big change and shift, even if it's about efficiency at the end. Talking about recycling, sorry. So we have a target of 50 billion of PET bottles to be recycled by year by 2025. Today, we are around 1/3 of that. 50 billion represent around 350 kilotons a year. Today, we have a capacity of 250 kilotons. So we are looking to triple the size of our recycling capacities of PET bottles and packaging. This is a huge investment, internal investments. We are building plants, but also external. We are purchasing companies doing recycling, and it's led a lot of work, especially on digital, about efficiency, but also about the work, about workforce empowerment, knowledge management, security, safety, and so forth, especially on recycling, which is not the simplest business we are operating in. That's a complicated business. The margin are very small, and it's highly mechanical. So we have a huge investment put on the recycling, and our vision is how we achieve that. So you see, we have a future-ready organization, and we have a lot of focus on Lean Six Sigma, working very, very closely with our colleagues from the Lean Six Sigma team, and together with digital. And the idea is, especially on recycling, is to move towards more real-time visualization, real-time data, real-time OEE on the shopping floor, for example, on the shop floor, in order to be more responsive and improve the efficiency of our people and workers. That's one of them. We have also some digital investment, for example, in how we can run supply chain. We're talking a lot about manufacturing, but supply chain is a key element just to secure the sourcing of the raw material. Recycling PET is a challenge. We're increasing the capacity. However, the main challenge is to secure the raw material. Today, we strongly believe PET is a material of choice. It's really low carbon intensive. We can recycle almost infinitively. Simply, we have a problem about today only 50% of PET bottles are being recycled in the world. So I think we should contribute to increase this percentage. And we are looking at different benchmarks, especially around aluminum, which has today, I think, more than 95% of recycling rate. So we are trying to find a solution and moving a bit more upstream, create some incentive through digital technologies, digital app, especially in market like in Asia, Southeast Asia, where we could engage with the community and through some innovative solutions in order to create an incentive and to increase the recyclability ratio. So you remember the first slide? Now we have been through a bit this strategy and especially the focus on recycling and biofeedstock. So this is a bit the same slide. On the first one, you see the PET, combined PET fibers, IOD. And you see a bit how we include that and we update that with the recycling, the sustainability efforts, with everything about circular feedstock and biofeedstock on the left, but also about the mechanical recycling and chemical recycling on the right. We are very strong today on mechanical recycling for bottle and packaging. We have still a lot of things to do around fibers and microfibers. The volume is different, the products are different. However, I think it poses a bigger threat for the society, especially with the microfibers used in hygienic products. So we are looking at that as well to work on post-consumer polyester out of our fibers products. Talking about digital, this is a bit my digital strategy in one slide. That looks a bit confused, but that's pretty simple. I will explain. You can see over on the top, of course, that is about the users and the employees, how we can increase the digital awareness, digital engagement, upskill our people. So, and our operations are supported by two big pillars, which are the business solution and the manufacturing solutions. Business solution, the strong effort having direct impact on sustainability is about supply chain, mostly. So supply chain is pretty wide. There is a lot of things falling under supply chain, but it comes from the sourcing, from the procurement all the way to the transportation management, fleet management system, and optimization of the throughput, which may contribute to operate on a greener way. On manufacturing solution, at traditional domain, sustainability linked to efficiency, reliability, risk prediction, and people empowerment. I used to like to call that, I like it, this is the Chief Digital Officer of Foxconn is calling that the 3W. That's waste reduction, work reduction, and worry less. And I think that summarizes pretty well what we do. And this is what, how we achieve that. We have this, on manufacturing, we have two approaches. We have the 25 larger sites I mentioned. We have 140 sites worldwide and keep growing. However, our 25 larger sites are responsible for 80% of our carbon footprint emissions, also our 80% of our EBITDA. So we have still an approach by sites, which we call the Titan projects, which is proactively going to this plant, these sites, and having a kind of a portfolio and a backlog management of project with a bunch of solutions. We are going to bring and accelerate the digitization of these factories, especially on process optimization, energy management. Beyond the top 25 sites, we cannot stay there. Otherwise, we will do nothing for recycling, for example. They're not big sites. So we have more an approach by domain. So either by business unit or by domain, by technology domain, for example, on energy management, energy monitoring, carbon accounting, for example. So this is a global domain, and we try to have a global, across the enterprise approach to scale these solutions across the board. And of course, this is supported, as you see, by our data and digital platform, I call Nexus, which is a bit the glue, allowing us to scale the solution across the enterprise with a better efficiency. So this is a bit our overview of the key domain we're working on and a bit how we organize, how we are structured. Okay, that's it for me.
How's everybody doing? Everybody enjoying the conference? Good to be in person, right? No Zoom, no Teams or anything like that? Okay, so maybe I'll start things off, right? Thanks, folks. Great presentations. I think it's finally good to shine a little bit of light on what's happening in the energy and chemicals industry. So I want to talk a little bit about the progress. So maybe this will be an open question to each panelist. So what can be said about the timeline for sustainability progress? And maybe if each of you could answer from your respective areas in energy transition or circular economy. Let's talk timeline. Eric, would you mind going first? Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, so as you saw on the slide, we have 2030 objective and 2050. However, in order to achieve our 2030 objectives, we have already a 2025 ones because we need to start now. A lot of industrial projects, that's not my domain, even if I'm involved in it, but when you install a carbon capture facility, when you're changing some turbine to move from the coal, for example, to gas or hydrogen turbine, that project you have multi years payback, and that's like a 5 to 7 years projects. So if we want to reach the 2030 objectives, which is 20% or 30% of reduction of greenhouse gas, we need to start now, actually. So we have a lot of work about the identification, the selection of technologies, and the prioritization, like always, which is happening right now. And also we launched I would like to share, it's also about internal talent and capabilities. At Indorama, the companies, we grew up extremely fast over the last decades by a lot of external acquisitions. But now we have corporate objectives which are requiring internal capabilities which we need to build. So this effort around sustainability is also an effort about building internal capabilities, skills, and savoir-faire, which we may not have had in the past. So this is also a transformation of the company and the way we operate.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, Jen, comments?
Yeah, so I think everything you said is absolutely true. I think about getting to 2030, I think it's a couple of years for some of these projects, but then I also think about getting to 2050 to net zero, which is the bolder ambition, right? And so to your point, carbon capture, it takes a couple of years to get your well in place, to get all the infrastructure in place, but think even beyond that, and that is an alternative fuel source to natural gas, like hydrogen, not using those today. It's gonna take, I think, even more time. Now, Europe may move a lot faster, and I think they will because they're not energy secure right now, what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war. But I think, we have to decide, it's about, if you can take natural gas to hydrogen or you create hydrogen through an electrolyzer, you can do it both ways. I think the question is, we still need to advance the technology a little more so it's cost effective. And it's not just about that, it's also about infrastructure. There's not enough infrastructure yet in place. And I think the Europeans are being very thoughtful today because they're looking at hydrogen networks. You've got to have pipelines, storage, all of these things in order to have regular ratable fuel. So that to me may take, frankly, I think even longer.
Years. John, what about you?
No, I agree with what both my colleagues have said there. Our focus is really much more on the greenfield development. So we kind of think about those 5 and 7 year processes and how can we make 7 years 5 or 4 to get some of these projects in place. But again, I absolutely agree about the lack of infrastructure that supports the projects. You think about our giga systems, we're trying to deploy them in the absence of having to rely on those other technologies. We really can't have project on project risk. So I can't rely on somebody else developing a network or waiting for something to come. So we tend to think about our projects in terms of what can we get done in that 3, 5, 7 year time frame to deliver early, understanding that all those other projects are coming along and they're going to be there. And the only way to get all the way to where we want to go by 2030 or 2050 is to have all of these processes working, the ones from the legacy companies and the ones from the new companies.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I'll just comment. So I'm with Aspen Technology, so I'm coming from a digitalization perspective. I think all of us would agree we're a bit behind globally on our climate goals, right? We know there's a lot that needs to get done. And so the urgency that I feel is that we need to use every technology possible to accelerate what we're working on. And I think digital is really critical for that because these early technology developments people need to do, you want to use simulation first, it'll help you move faster. You want to quickly scale, again, you need digital capability to do that. And we're behind, we need to get moving. And we've set and get ambitious goals, which is exactly the right thing to do, but now we need to use every tool possible to try to achieve that. So we're working on it.
Thanks, Paige. Yeah, okay. Any questions from the audience? Alex would be more than happy to bring the microphone over. All we ask is that you please stand and state your name and your company. Perfect. Thank you. Somebody sitting up front.
right. So every company has a net zero goal by 2050. So that's a common framework that we're all seeing. I'd like to hear what data you're ingesting today, and is it digitized, and how does that affect the strategies for how you go and attack decarbonization projects? And
Good
sorry,
question.
this is Aaron, GE Digital.
Thank you.
I can start maybe. Okay. That's a very good question, actually. It is digitized, but up to a certain point, not entirely. So a big part of the process is still manual, especially on the collect of the information on the carbon consumption. What is digitized is more the second part of it. When it's collected and put on the systems, the calculation and the carbon accounting, what they call. But how we capture this information is still highly manual, and this is an issue because it's highly time-consuming for people on the plant. And we're looking at solution of how we can automate that and try to certify the system instead of certifying the numbers which are today managed manually. So we're working with several companies on that and trying to look about what we can do in terms of how we can collect this data. Should we come from the meters, or should it come from an energy management systems, but we cannot install a EMIS on every our plant? That would not make sense. Or should it come, for example, from the invoices? Because if we have the consumption and the invoices, maybe we can do some calculation. So we're working on all of this. We're working with some institutes like science-based program and trying to find a solution of how we can automatize a bit more of that, because today it's heavily time-consuming for people on the plant. We're having a team of data scientists also dedicated to sustainability.
So I think from our perspective, we are not very different, I have to say. So we have a whole lot that is digitized. We do have a lot that's manual, but I also think that the other thing that we're learning through this journey is that we may not have the right granularity of data. So we have some that's overarching, and we understand what we need to go do and accomplish. I think as we're learning, we are looking for more granularity. So that to me becomes more of the manual part for us. And so, and we look at it from a site-by-site basis. And we're trying to create this closed loop where we are recycling everything we can. And so I think about things like we have olefin crackers today. So we crack a lot of ethane, which generates a lot of hydrogen that we want to recycle and then use as a fuel. So we're trying to close all that loop. And so all of that we're looking at, I think, for us to go forward and go faster, we are also doing the same thing. We're working with others to help us try and find that right level of granularity and how to get it digitized faster.
Yeah, so from our perspective with the Greenfield site, we started thinking about these challenges early on, knowing that what was ahead of us is a carbon accounting opportunity that's going to be massive, and the granularity is key. Just as an example, this plant that we're building compared to any other plant in a conventional fossil space, we have about 30 to 40% more IO just to capture all of that data at that granular level. So we know where every molecule came from and where every molecule is going, and we can account for the energy injected in the system, the emissions that went out, and what we've produced with those inputs. So it's going to be massive. The granularity of the data, and then the analytics and the processes and the process control and the machine learning and the AI is going to be critical, and we're planning for all of those aspects. It's going to be quite a challenge.
Paige, you want to add on to that?
Well, I'll just add that going from data to insight is what's really critical. So in some cases, it's cleanup of data, discovering it first and then cleanup. So it really becomes insight and helps people make better decisions. And that's not a simple process. I think we all know that. So initially it's, do we have the right data, but let's convert it to insight, which is the analytics and all that activity. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about measuring. I think you brought up, a good point, John. So critical metrics and standards companies are using. So what are some key metrics? Do they vary by geographical region? For example, is it CO2 impact? Is it water availability? What are you seeing in terms of critical metrics and standards? Yeah, go ahead and start, John. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so we looked at this. Our plants pretty much live and die by carbon intensity. So you basically deconstruct carbon intensity into all of the pieces and parts and all the metrics and measures that result in carbon intensity. And it's a pretty elaborate tree when you start to dissect that and divide it into all of its contributing metrics. But it's all of those things. It's water use and reuse. It's energy injected into the system. It's efficiency of pumps and motors. It's the carbon intensity of the product that came in by rail versus the carbon intensity of the product that came in by barge. It's how much yield loss did we have through pre-treatment, and so how much carbon intensity just evaporated because we had too much yield loss. So for us, it all starts with carbon intensity, and it kind of builds from a family of metrics around carbon intensity for us.
Yeah. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
I think the one thing I'll say is when we think about it from a manufacturing perspective, we were talking about this earlier today, you talk to the manufacturing sites, it's pounds per hour, metric tons per hour, right? How much are we making? What is our energy consumption? Because we want to be thoughtful on variable cost. The things we're looking at today is just, it's exponentially more things to look at, right? So part of it is we're trying to make sure we're looking at the right things first. You can't look at everything all at one time, but tackling the big problems first and then trying to understand impact and then move forward. But I say all that because, again, it comes back to data and it's a big lift. And so that's why I think we are trying to, at least at LyondellBasell, look at where we can get the most value first for the efforts we put forward and then work through the system. Because we have legacy sites, and so it does take a little bit time to get all that data.
Yeah.
Just going to add one comment as well as another critical metric, and both of you were talking about plastics recycling. We're not as far along in that conversation, I think, because this whole issue about mass balance or not and how you do different types of recycling, there's still more work to be done. So we're also a member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and we're very much part of that metrics conversation because that's a big one.
Yeah, I would say, just to add a bit to what has been said, which is also very valid for us, but Scope 1 and Scope 2, we pretty much know how to measure. It takes time. It's the question is how we can automate that, but we measure Scope 1, Scope 2. Scope 3 is a big challenge for us.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Any other questions, please? Just raise your hand. Eric or Alex will come along with the mic. State your name and company. Okay, back there, Alex.
Hi, I'm Jordan Pierce with OLI Systems. We talked a lot about output metrics as sort of our target. You talked a little bit about input metrics as well. So you're looking at energy intensity, what goes in versus what comes out. Do you make a distinction in your processes between these metrics, input and output, and how do they impact your businesses differently?
Any comments from anyone? Distinction between input and output metrics.
So maybe I'll take that one from a raw materials standpoint, and that's still, I think, to Paige's point, evolving. So we do think about input. So output, we understand our processes today. We know what our energy consumption is. We know what our CO2 footprint is. We can calculate all that. I think from an input perspective, that market is still evolving, and we know where we'd like it to go. So I'll use the example of circularity that Paige mentioned earlier. Chemical and mechanical recycled polymers still evolving. There's still not a lot of it, not enough of it out there. So, frankly, that's one of the reasons why we're involved, because we want to try and push that forward. We would love to have more pyrolysis oil and be able to crack pyrolysis oil. So it is important for us, the input piece. And so I think we do a couple of things. We do invest in those technologies. The other thing that we're doing, which I didn't mention earlier, is we also invest in venture capital. For those folks that have smaller projects and so that are trying to get something that has legs, I think some of the technologies of tomorrow are not the things we're thinking about today. So I think that's also a great way to have a little more visibility to the technology market.
So let's have a look at digitalization. So we've certainly been talking about each of the presentations contained significant digitalization examples. Let's maybe just dive in a little bit deeper into that topic. Maybe each of you could talk about how digitalization is accelerating your progress towards sustainability goals. Eric, can you start, please?
Yeah. So there is the what and the how. Actually, the what is a bit what I presented on the slides, but if I would have to summarize, is the measurement, and the needs of the measurement is evolving. We don't measure exactly the same things with exactly the same granularity or real time or not. and there is about efficiency. Less waste, higher yield, and overall efficiency. So efficiency is a big domain. We have OEE, we have maintenance, we have performance, we have waste reduction, and we have the measurement. The measurement is key because it's fitting what actually the question a bit earlier about how we can measure and how we can monitor. And sometimes, up to recently, what we measure was mostly focused on the operations. Today, we measure just to know because we have other KPIs to monitor. So this is a what. The how, it's a bit described in my last slides. We have very different approach on the how, but they are very people-oriented. I will say is how we can also involve everybody into these domains, how we can work very closely with all our business units, and how we can have an enterprise approach and not just as a proof of concept or pilot kind of approach. We try to scale, and which has been very hard for the whole industry for many years. So we really try to have an enterprise approach, and for that we try to build solutions around the people to make them more sustainable and efficient. But we could talk during hours and hours about the how. This is a key question actually.
Thank you, Eric.
Maybe just to add one additional point from my perspective, and that is, it's very important. We've worked very hard to get a lot of the data digitized, and we're still working on that because it allows us also to do scenario planning, how we overlap projects going forward, and so at the different sites, and every site is a little bit different. So I think that's been very important for us to be able to tailor make it to the site.
So from our perspective, we've talked a lot about kind of the operational focus of digitization. And so, the incredibly complex multi-variable model that will be the LP for us operating our plant is completely reliant on the digital structure. But we also see digital enabling us in a lot of other areas. Worker enablement. We are big believers in using digital systems for worker enablement. We're also big believers in relying on our digital systems and using our digital systems to help us with cybersecurity and operational risks and safety as well. So I think it helps us in all those fronts. The idea that digital is the enemy of cybersecurity is completely opposite. I think that all of us in these operations would agree that digital actually can help us with cybersecurity. And there's an old school that those systems are creating more risk than they're solving, but we don't believe that. We think that is the answer.
Thanks, John. Paige?
Maybe I'll just add the point on the scenario planning. These days with the supply chain challenges that people have, that ability to say, okay, what if the vessel doesn't show up with my raw material? What are my alternatives? What kind of things can I do? This is a very common activity right now, is rethinking everything because your supply chains have become less reliable. You need more flexibility. And then the volatility in the market has created huge issues as well. And I think only the other one I'd add that you did speak to, John, was for scale up, digital to help you scale, because that is going to be so critical, particularly the new technologies that are coming for sustainability. You need to scale them quickly. First, we've got to resolve the technology issues, but then very quickly scale that carbon capture activity or new hydrogen approach or whatever alternative it is. And we really need to use that to accelerate. And we're finding that's helping immensely in some of the scale-up activities, particularly for carbon capture right now.
If I may add, an important component also is what I said about the people, and it's to echo a bit what Jen presented, is how to manage. With the target of 2020, 2030, 2050, we have a huge portfolio of projects, much bigger than we ever had to manage. And on that, digital and technology in general, we're well positioned because we know how to manage a portfolio of projects. So the people management, but people upskills and training in terms of, it goes beyond digital, but digital has always been at the forefront of the project governance, the project management, the transformation from waterfall to agile, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think we have a role to play about helping the governance of the company, leveling up the governance of the project portfolio, because simply we have this experience within digital, and we have to train our companies, and we have to help support our companies on that.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Just raise your hand. Just let us know. In the meantime, I'll just shift to another question. So, so John, you've got greenfield facilities. Jen and Eric, you've got brownfield facilities. Paige, as with Aspen Tech, you work with both. So one of the things I think companies are faced with is the decision on where to build. Because let's face it, we need more technologies, we need more partners, more process licensors, more technologies in order to build either low carbon intensity products or circular products. So how do companies decide, or how do your companies decide on where to build the capital assets, and what are some key criteria for deciding where to build?
So for us, it starts with where we want it, right? As a greenfield developer, the last thing we want to do is go into regions or locations that aren't receptive. So we start thinking about where do we want to build? We want to build in places that we can have an impact, a positive impact, and places that really want to see us there. So that's one criteria, and so that's part of the social impact piece of what we do in development, is making sure that we're picking locations that don't have a negative social impact when we implement our projects there. Then we turn our attention to the full scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions criteria. Where can we get feedstocks and fuels in and products out in the most efficient, lowest carbon impact way, right? And then the third for us is flexibility, right? We got to be real careful to make our projects future-proof. Is how are we getting feedstocks and fuels in? How are we getting products out? Do we have multimodal transportation available to us? Do we have rail? Do we have pipeline? Do we have shallow water barge? Do we have deep water port? And so you'll find us placing projects in receptive regions that are looking and supportive of business expansion, where we can have a positive impact on the society where we build our projects, and where we have great logistics, both inbound and outbound logistics. So that's kind of our formula for development. As a greenfield, we kind of have it easy. We're not locked into some of those legacy assets. A little more challenging for some of those.
I mean, I think for new builds, if that's where we're going, and we are, I mean, we're looking at technology of tomorrow. Maybe you make olefins differently than we do today. I think everything John said is spot on, right? We look for a place where, we can bring materials in and out in an effective way. So it starts from the raws to the energy cost to produce, the ability to export your products. The only thing I would also add to overlay is, for those finished products that we're making today, what does the supply-demand balance look? Can we compete within that market, within that given product slate?
Okay, thanks, Jen. Yeah. Okay. Paige, maybe I can just switch to a question to you. So when the rest of us were still locked down, I know you traveled to the United Nations Climate Conference. I believe it was back in November, COP26.
COP26.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
What were some of the outcomes, maybe just for the folks?
Well, so the Glasgow conference, I think maybe many of you are familiar with it. So this the UN Climate Change Conference. And it was a significant event. First, it had been put off a year because of COVID. So they put it off, and then it wasn't a window before Omicron, so everyone could actually go. We were testing daily, so it was kind of intense, that whole environment. But I do think we made real progress. There was a sense of urgency, certainly, with the climate concerns. And then also, I think all of us have changed our perception of risk. We never would have thought something like COVID could happen, so suddenly any risk is something that we're much more aware of. And you felt that in the conversations and the urgency. I think there were some critical things that came out, thankfully, when all the nations got together and had these conversations. One is that there was much more discussion about metrics. We talked about that some here. I'd say we made progress. We're not resolved. There's still some other things to do, but the urgency that businesses need metrics. That's how you do business. We need them. And they're not only financial now, we need other tools. So that was really important. I think another critical factor is, it used to be that climate goals were looked at every 5 years. Countries would put in what they called the national defined contributions every 5 years. Coming out of Glasgow, that has to be done every year. So that means there's an urgency even within country boundaries to say, well, what are you doing at your plant this year to improve? And that is pushing everyone. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's what we need to do. And then one thing I'll just recognize here, since we have two big plastics producers, in the interim, there's been another UN event. The United Nations Environment Assembly met February and March, and they came out with the Plastic Waste Treaty. This is a huge movement forward, this acknowledgement that we've got to resolve plastic waste in the environment and consider the entire production life cycle for plastics. So the conversations are ongoing, but that was a significant next step that needed to be handled and will be impacting all of us as consumers, certainly, and then companies that participate. And so now we look to COP27 in Egypt in November. So hopefully more progress.
Thanks, Paige. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. Maybe we could just switch to, final recommendations. Is there anything that we haven't covered today? Do you have any recommendations for the asset owners and the solution providers that are here today and towards of building out that sustainability portfolio? Eric, maybe we'll start with you.
That's an interesting question. I think we have many aspects we haven't mentioned. I mean, it's such a large topic. It will be very pretentious to think we have covered everything in an hour and a half. I don't think of something specific. I think we still had a broad view today. We covered about what really matter. Recommendation, I don't know if I have any recommendation, but for me, I would say is data first and data and insights first. So if we don't measure, we don't know. And if we don't know how to take decisions, or we don't know which decision to take. And why I'm saying that is because maybe the decision of yesterday may not be the decision of tomorrow. We may have some counterintuitive decision to take based on the data. So I think data are an insight, not just raw data. Insights based on measurement is maybe more important than ever. And that's why we're putting a lot of focus on energy monitoring system and such things, because that may lead to different decisions than what we may have think at first. So we need to be ready to take different decisions and to really challenge a bit ourselves. And maybe if we have been in the industry for decades, we may have to be a bit humble and really to learn.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think for us, we know what we know how to do. We're good at it, right? And so I think as we move into a more sustainable space, it's important while we collaborate with others that you force us to think more innovatively. You're going to work with others. You're going to collaborate with others. This is an area where I love sustainability because I can sit with a competitor and we can share, right? When we couldn't do that before. So that's actually a really nice place to be today. So, I think my advice to you is force us to think differently. We have a tendency to be very laser focused because we know what we know. And so other opportunities to look at the data differently is going to be key.
Thanks, Jen.
No, I think she actually said exactly what I was going to say. Kind of the C in racer is continuous, right? So be open, be ready, and be ready that if we ask you to think about things differently, it's because we need to do things differently. I know the partners I've worked with over the last 2.5 years, we've asked them to do a lot of things differently than they've done them in the past. So be willing to do that. Listen to where things are going, because if we try to get there with the same tools, the same processes, the same mindset that we've used over the last 20 years that optimized fossil fuel production and offset its risk, we'll never get to the carbon reduction that we need to get to. You got to think differently.
That's right. These are challenging goals. So we need to use all the tools that we can. So innovation, I think in terms of partnership, like you're saying, that I'm so encouraged to see that when you can sit with competitors and have good conversations, but also innovation in terms of technology. I think we're seeing some real development, and it is that there is an urgency now, and the capital is flowing where it needs to go. The financing of this cool new technology that many companies are doing, I think, is so important for us to really make progress. And so I'm encouraged. I remain optimistic. I feel the urgency, but I'm going to be optimistic because I think we've got a lot of the tools that we need to make progress.
Okay, thanks, Paige. Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending, and join me in thanking the panelists.